Good evening. Hi. So welcome to the college lecture series. Welcome to those of you that are here tonight. Welcome to those that are joining us on YouTube tonight, and also welcome to those that are going to be joining us in the future. My name is Carl Dobman. I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Technological University. One of the many things that I love about the College of Architecture and Design is the range of design disciplines. Our students design from the scale of a handheld game to that of urban design. And I most enjoy the moments where we can discuss disciplinary similarities and differences. The speakers in our lecture series exemplify this range of design, and in some instances, like tonight with Bruce Tharp, our speakers help to expand the understanding and synthesize the differences. Ronald Burt, a sociologist from the University of Chicago, says that innovation tends to occur in the structural holes between social groups. This is relevant because Bruce has an amazing range in his education and in other ways too. He has an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering, a Master of Industrial Design from Pratt, and then he went on to receive an MA and a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Chicago. He understands the methodologies and practices of multiple groups, and his work is situated in these gaps between these clear disciplinary differences. As an anthropologist, Bruce spent 2 years living with the Amish of Indiana, studying their material culture and the production and consumption of value. Bruce, along with his wife Stephanie, established their creative studio, Materius, in Chicago in 2005. Materius is an archaic word that means both substance and substantive, reflecting their concern for imbuing deep meaning and value within domestic products. Their practice spans the 4 fields of commercial, responsible, experimental, and discursive design. The 4-field approach to design theory and practice was conceptualized by them and has been incorporated into design thinking in classrooms all over the world. They've patented designs, licensed designs, their designs are sold commercially, they've been awarded commissions, they also engage in self-production and wholesale retail sales. Materius has exhibited in global design capitals, and both Bruce and Stephanie are tenured faculty at the Stamps School of Art and Design. Their practice is a partnership, and important to note that this is the first of 3 partnerships that we'll be presenting, husband and wife design partnerships that we'll be presenting as part of our fall lecture series. If all of that wasn't enough, Bruce and Stephanie are also co-writing a book. The book is entitled Discursive Design, a realm of expanded design practice that they've helped to problematize and legitimize over the past decade. I learned about this book from a mutual friend and was curious to engage in that conversation as our own college has been discussing the evolution of many things that deal with multidisciplinary design, including our basic design sequence. For me, this is a funny moment this evening because I've known Bruce for a number of years, but I've never seen him lecture or talk about his work. I actually used to see him riding his bike past my office in Carytown in Ann Arbor, and I think that's probably how we started talking. So I'm very excited to learn more about Bruce and Stephanie's work, so please help me in giving them a warm welcome to Lawrence Tech.
Actually, oops, did something just bad happen? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. This is not an omen. Is it? I see it on my screen.
Someone just told me to jiggle the cable.
Jiggle the cable, okay. Which cable, that one?
Here comes.
Uh-oh, to save the day. Well, I say thank you. It's I really enjoy speaking about this topic specifically that I'll be discussing today, and it's related. What I'm not going to be doing is talking very much about our own individual practice and work, and more about this area of discursive design, the expanded realm of design that I think is relevant today. So the work that you'll be seeing, that I'll be showing, is not our own work, but those of other people that we're sort of conceptualizing under this space. So. So as Carl said, we're both faculty members at the Stamps School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan, and he also mentioned that we were working on a book project, and we have been working on this project for a number of years. And we used to be like this, but now we're like that after spending many years working together, writing a book. So a word of caution for you, any of you who want to work with a significant other on a multi-year process. So what I'm going to do today, so I'm an industrial designer, product designer by training, and I understand that we've have a lot of different fields that are represented, and despite the fact that I was speaking through that lens of product design, what I think there's relevance broadly, and I'm interested in a discussion actually afterwards about how, for your particular discipline, what makes sense, what may not make sense as much, and we can begin to talk about this more broadly, because we imagine it as broadly relevant to the design, all design fields. So mostly I'm sort of 3 acts today. The first act is beginning to discuss design as an expanded field, how it's progressed over the last century. Then I'm going to introduce discursive design specifically, and this is a type of design, and it comes out of discourse, and we'll dig more deeply into that. And then within, just like design itself has expanded, so too has discursive design in the last couple of decades, and I'm going to talk about 4 different domains for that. But importantly, begin to discuss how this practice is relevant, and actually it's almost recursive, that it, and this is the idea of beyond design and back again, where a lot of this began as an expansion upon sort of a status quo design practice, but how this is actually looping back in, and this expanded design now can begin to inform more traditional approaches to design. So so maybe the first 20 minutes is a little bit more word-based, and then I'll be showing a lot of project examples near the end. So those of you who are more visual, you got to hang with me a little bit for the first bit. So this is kind of the model about how I see industrial product design, sort of as how it operated, 100 years ago when it first started to come on the scene. This sort of single-lane road through this wilderness, and this was a road of commerce largely. That we think about industrial product design as sort of a handmaiden of industry, and this is where it came from, in support of commerce, and largely how it's seen, and actually still seen today. But I'm positing that we've gone from this kind of model to this type of model, where it's much more complex than that, and while we still have largely a commercial agenda, and this is still sort of the most well-trodden path. Part of this expansion, I'm going to talk about this area of responsible, experimental, and discursive sort of arms of this. And this is what we present as a 4-field framework, and Carl mentioned this. And I'm going to assume that you don't know much about it, but even though that, I'm still going to touch it lightly so we can dig a little bit deeper. But this is kind of the larger frame for the discussion. So if we think about these 4 different realms, as new faculty member, we felt, Stephanie and I, she was teaching at the University of Illinois Chicago at the time, and I was teaching at the School of the Arts in Chicago. And we're working with students and trying to help them find their way through what is a bit of a mess, actually, if you think about the design field, all the different types of design. And one of these projects that we engaged with, we collected scores of types of design, and we basically tried to organize them in a way that began to make sense. And these 4 fields, these 4 sort of buckets or category, what came out of that process. But we're trying to help students find their way through it, and this was sort of an initial way to begin to do that. So it's structured not about what we design, and this is how most schools structure things. And we have toy design, shoe design, car design, furniture design, consumer electronics design. So it's not structured in that way. It's not structured about how we design either. We've got universal design, inclusive design, emotional design, sustainable design. So it's not about the how, but it's really getting at this issue of why. And this is especially pertinent when we were dealing with students because they were able to ask this the question. So it's a system that's sort of structured that way. And we had written an article, so if you're interested in digging a little bit deeper, there's an article on Core 77, so core77.com, which is one of the bigger product design websites in the country, and you can just sort of look, 4 fields, and you can read a little bit more on that. But so I want to first begin to break this open a little bit, and it may be very straightforward, but we've got commercial design that's focused on, it has a focus on profit. Responsive design is a focus on serving the underserved. Experimental design is focused on exploration. And discursive design, which again comes from the word discourse, is focused on reflection or a critical reflection. It's sort of an intellectual engagement. So these are the 4 fields, and I'll give you just one product example from each one to help discuss it a little bit. So it's hard to have a product design presentation that doesn't incorporate Apple in some way. So this is the iPhone. We look at this quintessential commercial design. And this is obviously focused on profit, right? The first, $1 trillion market cap company on the planet, and they create products that are useful, usable, desirable, and they get paid very well for it, right? And we can remember back in 1984 when actually Steve Jobs was fired from Apple because of disappointing sales of the Macintosh computer at that point. So the idea is that while we sometimes think of Apple as sort of this avant-garde company that's really pushing design, fundamentally, if they're not making money at the end of the day, they're not going to be in business. So that's the focus, right? That's very straightforward. This is a project, it's called the LORM glove, or mobile LORM glove. And this is a project that was developed in the Design Research Lab in Berlin. And this is developed specifically for those who are deaf-blind, so those who are deaf and blind. So you think about the mobile communications boom, and so they're completely left out of this. And so this is a device that works, it's an interface with a phone. There's an existing alphabet called LORM, and it's used by stroking. Again, you can't see, you can't hear, so the way the deaf-blind communicate is through touch. And there's an alphabet that works out where on one side of the hand and the other side of the hand. And what this glove does is actually it's an interface device that allows deaf-blind to communicate with LORM through a phone to others. So it translates that to text. And then in the experimental zone, so this is a project that was done by David Mellis at the MIT Media Lab as part of his PhD dissertation, and he had actually used this phone for a number of years. I don't know if he's still, as of I think 3 years ago, he still had it in his pocket and used it. But here, this is like a lot of the work that comes out of the MIT Media Lab. It's very exploratory around the area of technology. And here, what David Mellis was doing is he was really looking at the possibilities for individual construction and customization of a cell phone. So he's looking at the implications of digital fabrication and open source hardware for a DIY practice. So basically, people all over the world have basically taken his plans and have made their own mobile phones. So he's really looking, in this case, he was really looking at DIY practice and customization and digital fabrication, and it just happened to be the phone was the device that he used to sort of explore those topics. And then discursive design. So as I mentioned, dealing with reflection. So this is a project called Social Mobiles, and this is one that was done in the early 2000s in the UK by IDEO. So IDEO is undoubtedly the most well-known industrial design firm or design firm now in the world. And this is a project that they worked on right around the times where mobile phones were being introduced, that people started to have mobile phones. And there was, I think they did a poll in the UK, and the mobile phone was sort of in the top 5 most hated devices. And on that list was also nuclear weapons and landmines. So because there was this new phone, and basically we didn't know how to incorporate this into social life, and people were talking loudly, and how to begin to do that. So they created a series of five phones, I think it was, that all explored different aspects of that. And this is one, I think this is the Catapult phone, where the idea is that if someone is, say, talking loudly or using the phone inappropriately or socially inappropriately, that you can sort of disrupt their phone call with yours. So you can basically interrupt each other's phone calls if someone's doing this. So you're talking loudly, and then this happens, you're like, okay, well, maybe I should talk more quietly. So these were a series of projects that here, a commercial design firm was doing basically to explore this larger topic of cell phones in social space. So what we have here, right, we have 4 phones, 4 mobile communication devices, but for very different reasons for why they exist. And so this is sort of the meat of this way of organizing. It's not about the object itself, but really why it begins to exist. And so this has been, this sort of framework has been around for over a decade, and those who have found value in it usually find it because, not because of sort of clear classifications, but because there's an acknowledgement there's overlap, right? That it's not always just one thing, right? You can be exploratory and commercial at the same time, for example. So one of the things we use is this sort of hybrid, we call it a hybridity map, where you're able to sort of look high, medium, and low, or none, with sort of these 4 agendas. And that's it's easy to get hung up in the notion of fields, but it's really the idea of the agenda that you've got. And we contend that there's really a dominant agenda when you begin to work on a project, even though you may have other supplemental ones as well. So the idea is it's a framework that helps start conversations rather than end them. So it begins a common language, a common way to begin to approach the rationale for a project. And this also is valuable when you have teamwork as well, because you have a team and they may be coming to a project with very different agendas and what's valuable for them. And it allows you to sort of unpack that a little bit. So that's this sort of 4-field approach, and sort of acknowledging this as expansion of design. And so I want to kind of work into phase 2 and really focus on this area of discursive design. So as I mentioned before, we have reflection, and it's the idea of a critical reflection. So new thinking, new thought, it's an intellectual engagement. And what's interesting is if we look at a lot of the, I would say all these visual creative disciplines, they all have, in a way, permission to work in this way. But what's interesting about product design specifically is it's had a harder time having legitimacy in this realm. If the idea that, like with graphic design, this one I often use this example, is that as a graphic designer you can work on creating a better ballad. Right, so we don't have some of the problems we had with the 2000 election with hanging chads and things like that. So you can create a better ballot. There's a useful utility to that. But as a graphic designer, you can also create a political poster, and that's completely legitimate. It's a lot harder. It has been a lot harder for design to work in that realm as well. Yes, we'll work on the utility side, but this engagement on the intellectual side has been a little bit more problematic. And so that's what we're addressing with this book project, and in some of our own work, and certainly others as well. So this is how we begin to define a discursive design. Okay, and the idea here that it's not just any idea, it's not just any content, but there's sort of a substance to the content as well. Because one of the things about actually experimental design, largely we see experimental design experimenting with fabrication, materials, but it can also begin to experiment with concepts and things like that. So there's a little bit of a, with experimental design, you can say explore the notion of freedom with, explore that process, but it's a little bit different when we think about discursive design in the kind of content that would be part of that. And that really comes around this idea of discourse. I won't go into sort of some of the, where we're beginning to define and see this a little bit, but I will just sort of say that we're looking at discourse as systems of thought or knowledge. And this is where the breakdown happens, where if you're doing a project and you want to talk about lightness or openness or freedom, it's not always necessarily this sort of system of thought or knowledge. So there's a sort of a little bit of a depth to it, and it's also contested. It's a contestable topic that's done, and which is why this is often thought of as design for debate. Also, this idea that it's embodied or engendered through artifacts. And this is something we see from like Michel Foucault, who wrote a lot about discourse in the 20th century. And think about like discourse is actually everywhere. It's around us. And so this is actually helpful for us as designers because we can take that idea and we can think about it being embodied or engendered in these artifacts. And the last one, and this is sort of important, is that and this is where there's a little bit of debate right now within this area of practice, is the way we see this is the goal is really reflection or debate, and only potentially actually practice engagement in the world. And the idea here is that's really the reflection is the first stop, what we call sort of the first revolution, and that comes from this idea from Gil Scott Heron, and hopefully the audio is going to work on this, but you've probably heard this notion, the revolution will not be televised. But his explanation of this is sort of helpful as we begin to think about this realm. So hopefully this will work.
But the revolution will not be televised.
Okay, so the audio's not, it was working, the audio's not working.
A lot of times people see battles and skirmishes.
Is there a way we can get this to work? Hello,
the
anyone?
Of the revolution being televised. The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things and see that there might be another way to look at it that you have not been shown. What you see later on is the results of that, but the revolution.
Yeah. You have a headphone jack.
Oh, that usually the
I know.
Yeah, it comes through there.
I know.
Yeah, it's right here. Okay. Yeah.
Let's try.
Yeah. No, that actually, no, it's not even working here. Yeah. Oh.
Plug it back in.
I'll plug the
jack
audio
back
in.
in.
Okay.
Because it popped up right when I pulled it out.
Okay.
When you say it popped up, did you?
Of the revolution
Okay.
of being televised. The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things.
What did Scott do before for you? Just put this into a different jack altogether?
Right, it was in a jack over here, and he moved it to a jack over here.
Is there another port on?
Yeah, there's another on this side. Yeah.
Try that.
When we were messing with this yesterday, it was on the left side that it worked.
There might be another way to look at it that you have not been shown. What you see later on is the results of that.
All right,
but the revolution,
pause
that
it.
change.
Yeah, because I have a lot of video. My,
your settings?
yeah, I'll just escape here. And,
We got this.
Yeah,
Okay.
it might just be
Okay.
specifying in the settings.
We had it working, so I didn't, and we didn't change the settings.
Something may have changed since your motions. I'm not sure. Going to sound. Yeah, you want to choose. That
Oh, maybe it reset?
Yeah, it might have.
Okay, so if we go
Now
this.
it should work.
The revolution will.
Ah, there we go. Excellent. We're back in business here. Okay, so. Okay. So everyone's heard of the revolution will not be televised. Have you heard that phrase before? Okay. All right, so here we go.
The revolution will not be televised. You see, a lot of times people see battles and skirmishes on TV and they say, aha, the revolution is being televised. Nah, the results of the revolution are being televised. The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things and see that there might be another way to look at it that you have not been shown. What you see later on is the results of that, but the revolution, that change that takes place, will not be televised.
So the idea there, and this is reflected in this kind of work, is that there is a reflection that's kind of baseline for this discursive work, and then there's a change in thinking, and then only after that do we begin to see action in the world. And it's this issue of action in the world and how much action in the world, which different types of design begin to take on a little bit differently. I'll mention too that that sort of a little bit historically that there was this notion. Basically in the mid-1990s is when Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby at the Royal College of Art, along with William Gaver, who was there at the time working, sort of established this area of critical design. And at that time, they really saw it as the against this notion of affirmative design. So affirmative design are the type of design that affirms existing social conditions and the status quo, and critical design was sort of a challenge to that. And that's sort of where all of where this began to come from. And this is interesting with this field because this is very much sort of against, say, market and conventional design. And this is an idea that's still existent, but it's something that I'm going to talk through and begin to challenge that a little bit. So the other idea about discursive design that I want to put forth is this analogy of genus versus species. So we see it as a genus. So it basically includes this whole range of design that's happened at least the last couple decades, and we can even go back and look at anti-design, even in architecture back in the in the 60s and 70s. But the most prevalent forms are critical design, design fiction, and speculative designs. How many people have heard of these before? Right? Okay. Okay. So they said they're the most prevalent right now, and actually some even sort of think of design fiction maybe as a subspecies of speculative design. But this is kind of where we see it, and we don't basically by discursive design we're kind of backing up and including it's a kind of a pluralist approach where all these types of design are working with this notion of reflection as being dominant. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some of the projects that'll help sort of bring this out. So less text and now more projects. So this is a project, Drone Aviary by Superflux. And how they describe it is Drone Aviary is an investigation of the social, political, and cultural potential of drone technology as it enters civil space. Through a series of ongoing installations, films, and publications, the project aims to give a glimpse into the near future city, how it cohabitates with intelligent, semi-autonomous, networked flying machines. So they basically did a series of these drones. And it's what's sort of common in this type of work is there's a lot of video that's often done to help communicate these ideas. So this is one of those, one of the videos. So what it's giving you this sort of a drone's eye view of things, and it's meant to be a little unnerving, right? So the drone identifies these 3 youth as statutory nuisances, right? And so it's giving what is not seen with the drones at all. So the drones become protagonists, revealing fleeting glimpses of the city from their perspective as they continuously collect and perform tasks. It hints at a world where the network begins to gain physical autonomy, moving through and making decisions about the world, influencing our lives in often opaque yet profound ways. So this is what they're looking at, right? So like we got drone technology, and this is what's going to happen. Is this the type of future or present that we want to have? This another project is called the Toaster Project. Have people seen this before? Okay, so this was actually on the Colbert Report, and is a TED Talk and a book about this project, and this is about Thomas Thwaites' project. This is, in his words, I'm trying to build a toaster from scratch, beginning by mining the raw materials and ending with a product that Argos, which is a supermarket, sells for only £3.99. So the idea is that he was sort of struck by the fact that how could you possibly have a toaster that sells for $10 in a store? Like, what's going on with that? So his thesis project when he was at the school at the RCA was really trying to recreate that, smelting ore. So the idea that he was working with is, so it's the contrast in scale between the consumer products we use in the home and the industry that produces them is, I think, in his words, absurd. Massive industrial activity devoted to making objects which enable us, the consumer, to toast bread more efficiently. These items betray no trace of their provenance. So in this project was really about the process, less so the final thing. In fact, the fact that he's got kind of a grotesque final form really speaks to the challenges of this process. So he's really looking at the incredible efficiency of industrialized systems, but also sort of the costs of consumerism and some of the powers behind consumer culture. So there's these forms of exploitation, sort of human and environmental, that are going on. And so this is the kinds of things with this project he's asking his audience to begin to reflect on. And then this is Aggie Haynes' Transfiguration. So she comes from a family that does a lot of work with wax and Madame Tussauds, that industry around that. And so this is sort of a series of wax babies that she created. And so we see less the ability to, like, looking at at a traditional notion of product, but here's like the body itself, the child, as product in this way. So it's looking at the future of bioengineering with actually technology that is available today. So with this one baby, extending the skin on the scalp increases the surface area for faster heat dissipation. With the increase in global warming, this child would be able to withstand working in high temperatures due to the higher number of veins near the surface of the skin. So this is in an era of global warming. This is a kind of transformation that we might engage in. So she has a sort of series of these 5 different babies, all of which have different changes, biological changes that were sort of engineered around them. So, and here more than looking at, again, the product, we're looking at technology and biological and genetic engineering. Again, looking at is, now that we have this ability to do this, what should we do with it? This project is Sincerely by Natsuki Hayashi. So her master's thesis, entitled Sincerely, explores a contemporary design of assisted suicide. Utilizing design to reimagine the way we die, Natsuki pushes the boundaries of the legality, morality, and emotionally appropriate ways to end life. So I think there are 5 states now that have assisted suicide, legal assisted suicide, euthanasia, and she's looking at this. Largely, she's speaking to the design community, saying, hey, this is an area that is really rife for design, and it's going to be a problem that is increasing. We look at some of the demographic bubble. Like, we can't afford to spend 25% of our Medicaid budget on the last year of life, right? We're going to bankrupt Medicaid, Medicare with that process. So here this particular project in that is called Passage. It's a final cocktail kit consisting of a cup, a mixing spoon, a tray for preparing one's last drink. Inspired by Asian tea ceremony and tea sets, passage introduces the element of considered and deliberate ritual into the preparation of making one's final beverage. So, and there's, again, to look at a little demonstration of that. So looking at the question of how do we begin to design for this end-of-life ritual where there's meaning, there's agency, and sort of dignity in this process. And if we begin to shift gears, so the next project is done by the Near Future Laboratory, and it's their TBD Catalog. And this is one of the most ambitious of these types of projects where a team of designers, actually working in Detroit is where they met, they worked on their 66 fictional products and 62 168 fictional projects and 62 farcical ads. So we're really shifting gears from the last one a bit here. So.
What is the near future of surveillance, of cloud computing? What is the near future of open source education? Will there be beer in the future? Beef jerky? What will stress us out? What sort of future exists for the humble ice cube? What kind of pests will need eradication? Will algorithms for finding love be better in the future? To answer that, we created a design fiction product catalog. It was not a means to predict the future. It was a means to suggest it, to imply it, to discuss it. By creating objects, the products and services that would be part of a possible near future world.
So this is, again, a little more lighthearted look at this, but the same idea of thinking about what are these near future technologies and how do we begin to relate? And the whole idea here is that if we can begin to imagine different futures, then we can think about, is that a future we want to move toward or away from, and what do we do in the present in order to do that? So if we look at sort of these sort of traditional ways that, that this work has been done, it really falls in this category of social engagement. And it's kind of a form of design activism. But also, at the same time that this was really starting in the mid-late 1990s, we see it being used actually in a research frame as well. And this largely happened through how funding was happening for universities in the UK, where art and design schools then actually had to show that they were doing research, and we saw this sort of shift in how art and design began to approach things, and design research became a much bigger issue there. So we sort of see that that different type of approach to this as well, where it's not just social engagement, but we can look at this as a applied research tool. But actually projecting forward a little bit, we can also see this, how this form of work might actually be basic research. And basic research, is sort of a more academic, scholarly, pure research that looks at, getting at general principles and knowledge that way. We can see how it might be used there, and also in this area of practical application. And these are what we understand, sort of these four domains of discursive design, that rather than just seeing it purely as social engagement, we can see broader applications for this. And this is where we're coming back again with these four domains, and I'm going to talk about some projects here that really deal with this, a very practical approach to using this type of design that, again, was initially a movement away from the status quo. So we can see this happening, again, in social engagement and how companies are involved with this. So this is a project called Epidermic. So Stuart Carton Design, which is a California-based company, they do a lot of work with in consumer electronics, and they did a project called Cautionary Visions where they produced, it was about 10, I think, different products, and this is one of them. And this is kind of an interactive pet. So this is sort of the description of it. So epidermids are fully functioning organisms resulting from advanced tissue engineering and the latest fuel cell and electronics technology. They don't feel pain or think, but follow a complex set of algorithms. They require minimal maintenance, can be stored in a state of forced hibernation in a standard refrigerator, and are customizable with different body, skin, and hair selections and through tanning, tattooing, and piercing. So it really gets at this issue of just because we can, should we? And we see this as sort of a little, sort of an advanced Tamagotchi kind of toy there. And so why would a company, a design company, actually engage in a project like this? Well, largely for branding. So they felt it was worth the considerable cost to have a team of designers begin to work on a number of these projects because it allowed them to be thought of as a thought leader in their field. So it helped, they do this kind of consumer electronics work, so rather than just going to any other design consultancy, here Stuart Karn is sort of presenting themselves as one that really looking at some of the deeper issues behind this. So we see this work done with sort of from a branding perspective often. This is a project called NaturePod. And so the idea here is that there's sort of it uses like an iPhone or a digital interface, and you can basically lay on this and be immersed in nature. So what if you could, it asks the question, what if you could reap the health benefits of spending time in nature for productivity, creativity, and stress relief without leaving your office? All this is coming soon to a cubicle near you. So if we look at this, sort of a little bit of an explanation of this project.
The concept of it's amazing.
I actually felt like I was in nature.
This is our lunch break, and I was like, we're spending 5 minutes.
Having this in the office would be definitely a good thing, for sure.
In my personal time, this is definitely something that I would love to see.
Relaxing.
Interesting. I think it is a bit ironic that we have to resort to technology to immerse us in 10 minutes of nature.
I think it's a bit ridiculous. To me, this gives workplaces that don't want to spend that kind of effort an easy out. So this is a sort of an interesting project because it's a spoof, basically. So they went to IDEX, which is the largest interior architecture trade show in Canada, and set up a trade booth and had company T-shirts and presented this as if this were a real product that were coming out next season. It's also interesting too because it had corporate sponsorship for doing that. So it was sponsored by Interface, which is a sustainability-minded flooring company. So this is maybe a little bit less direct than the epidermids example, but here the theme of power of nature, corporate responsibility for employee well-being was sort of baked into this. So the president of Interface wanted to get behind this project and pose this question to the community. So again, the rationale here is also a sort of form of branding. This is a project looking at future technology and its impact on soccer players, coaches, and fans. And this is part of a museum exhibit in Spain. And one of the parts of this, they put together this tabloid paper that you can kind of see right here. And this is sort of, again, commissioned by the National Football Museum and the Center for Contemporary Culture. So this is a little bit of a description about it.
Today, increasingly, data is becoming, like money, one of the key shaping forces of the sport of football today. And we are quantifying and measuring the sport in ways that have never happened before. I mean, this particular work is a manifestation of what we call design fiction, which is a particularly new area of practice whereby you actually kind of create objects that themselves suggest a larger world. They are prototypes, but they're prototypes taken out of a particular future. And they're meant to be an artifact that gives people something tangible to pick up, to absorb, to investigate, to question themselves. So it's unique in that it doesn't look like a piece of art or design, but in effect, it's a speculative artifact. So one of the really interesting things about design fiction is that it's a very playful, or it can be a very playful practice. And in this case, we've actually taken it out into the city, not just left it sort of sitting in the museum as a work, but taken it out to places that are culturally relevant to the form of a sports page. Put it in betting shops, newsstands, taxis, on trams, in part to kind of let it fulfill its additional function. And that is a slightly uncanny artifact in the real world.
Okay. So, so a large commission for this project, and again, looking a little bit at future and near future scenario. I'm going to skip this project. Just mention that this Museum of the Future, which is a several-year project, started in 2014, and every year the United Arab Emirates works on this project, and it's undoubtedly the largest design fiction project where they create a whole bunch of different things. Actually, I'll show a little bit of it just to make it relevant. So, actually, if I go back to that, did I see? Oh, so if what we saw there is this idea of like, would you begin to like enhance your kid's body? So that was the same discourse we sort of saw a little earlier on. But here, that's what's being sort of asked in this museum exhibition is you're being posed with these questions, and it's sort of engaging in the audience in a way that is very different from how we see some of these other types of corporate videos. So I just want to make a distinction. Then this is a project called Corning, A Day Made of Glass. And I've sped the speed up, or increased the speed a little bit, but I'll give you just a little bit of a glimpse of this. This came out a decade ago, probably. So I'd just like to differentiate between what's going on here and say what went on in the Museum of the Future, where it's much more edgier. This is largely a promotional video for a glass company to say, look at all the great things that we can do with glass. It's actually just extending out the values of today into the future with just more technology versus probing what Dun and Raby calls sort of value fictions. Rather than science fiction, we have value fictions, and that's something that this discursive area does really well. So there's a distinction there, and same thing with concept cars, right? So the motor industry, right, has done lots with concept cars, but they're, again, technological extrapolations from today that aren't really probing any of these sort of substantive topics that we were getting at with discourse. So these are done at the level of the company, and here's a project that was actually used through Kickstarter.
Arrange is a board game that forces participants to confront the struggles of an arranged marriage. The culture of arranged marriages is still very prevalent in South Asian societies. Most girls are forced into marrying somebody their parents picked for them. These guys are chosen on the basis of their wealth and social class. Sometimes it's even a business deal. The girl's role in these marriages is just as superficial. Because of this, they have to present themselves as being the perfect bride at all times, and this causes them to use things such as skin whitening creams and diet pills. The girls are also too afraid to remove themselves from these situations because they're not educated enough to be able to provide for themselves or to live an independent life. I think the first step to fixing any problem is to acknowledging that it even exists, and then hoping that people will have a conversation about it. Arrange provides a platform for people to be able to discuss the issue that is present, and it does so in a very lighthearted setting.
All right. So here she was able to basically take this project through a practical commercial format like crowdfunding and to be able to extrapolate that. So she got $21,000 for that, and this is an area where actually discursive design is really starting to imagine this. This platform is very helpful for getting projects out there, getting people aware, so it's a dissemination as well, and also with the possibility of actually having this be an alternate source of income for designers. So we see this as a possible way, as a sole form of practice or a practice that actually augments a very commercial practice. So those are all in the area of social engagement that we're also in this practical area that we're talking about. But also I just want to mention, I'll show a project here that deals with applied research as well. And this is where, again, largely where this has been happening since the late 1990s at least. So this is Philips, and larger, bigger companies have the R&D budget to begin to do this type of research through what are often called design probes or provocative prototypes. So this is one such project done by Philips. So we begin to see the tattoo begin to emerge because of the touch of the skin. So the video goes on, and I'm gonna skip now to Clive Van Heerden, and he's a senior director at Philips. Sort of talk about how, after they showed this, made this available to the public, and they solicited feedback on it, and he's going to just mention briefly a little bit about what that was like.
Most of the initial reaction was all about, okay, so this is, people speculating on the techniques. Nobody doubted that it would happen. No one seemed to be at all surprised in the idea of moving ink, addressable moving ink under the skin. Nobody asked, is this stuff going to give me cancer? Who fixes it if it breaks down? Overriding concern was, does this mean the corporations are going to hack into my body? That's what came through unbelievably loudly. And beyond the sort of first wave, which was all hip-hop discussion and stuff about body art, MIT then published a paper on silicon silk subcutaneous displays, and you had a second wave of technical discussion. And now there's a third wave, because medical tattoos have just been in the press again. That for us is money in the bank, taking an understanding of a very, very, very strong, heartfelt anxiety. We don't trust what's happening beneath the surfaces of these things. So I would like focus in on that. So for Philips, he said that for us is money in the bank. So that they're able to use this probe, this provocative prototype, as a way to understand and direct some of their future corporate endeavors. And so the last sort of project in this realm is this idea of the UK government, sort of the first to use this within a larger sort of research frame to begin to understand an aging society and what an aging society would want. So Strange Telemetry is a design firm that was working on this project. So basically, as part of their research, they were creating these visuals and then presenting them to an elderly population that begin to have discussions and unpack these visuals. And this one, for example, and they modeled these after things that were existing in the locations that the workshops were happening. So, you can begin to read this backwards. This is, a repair shop for domestic robot parts repair and cleaning. And so there are all kinds of small hints of the future sort of baked into this that the participants began to unpack. And so this is sort of another sort of a public view, and this is another one where we see sort of corporate sponsorship of say, charging stations and things like that. So again, using this in order to understand as a research tool to help them make policy for an aging population that's coming demographically.
So if we see that happening with applied research, we can also imagine what it would look like is basic research. So basic research is done right now on the field of discursive design itself. There are PhD students looking at how to do this design better, looking for general principles. But it's not something yet that is being done with other disciplines. And so this is sort of on the forefront, I think, for this area where a psychologist might actually write into a grant a designer to begin to work on some of these provocative prototypes. Because one of the things that it does really well is gets at values, beliefs, and attitudes, which are a lot harder to do in sort of with typical objects. So basically, in other research formats, right, we show a prototype, and then we get feedback on ergonomics or aesthetics or usability, but it does less of a job at this issue of deeper values. And these provocative prototypes done this way can really begin to get at that. And the last project that I'm going to show is in this area of practical application. This is an orientation towards practice where there's a distinct operative goal. And this is, again, a little bit on the horizon for this kind of work. And again, if we think of this as getting at values and beliefs and getting people to have conversations, debate about issues, I talked to a woman who worked, she's a doctor, and she actually did work with art and end-of-life conversations. As I mentioned before, with 25% of our budget going for the last year of life, and also putting people in difficult situations where, say, someone is in an accident, they go in a coma, and the family doesn't know what to do. They don't know what the wishes of the loved one who's in this position. And doctors are kind of stuck too, right? They're kind of in between. So this is really a problematic area with these end-of-life discussions. And so the medical community is looking at how do we begin to get people to have these difficult conversations earlier so that we can go in when accidents happen or when we get to end of life. We don't have to guess. We already begin to know. And so the proposition I made with this doctor is that instead of art, might she be able to use design in this way? And this is sort of the example I gave to her. This is called a euthanasia coaster. And so the idea here is euthanasia coaster is a hypothetical death machine in the form of a roller coaster, engineered to humanely, with elegance and euphoria, take the life of a human being. Riding the coaster's track, the rider is subjected to a series of intensive motion elements that induce various unique experiences, from euphoria to thrill to then from tunnel vision to loss of consciousness, and eventually to death. Thanks to the marriage of advanced cross-disciplinary research in aeronautics, space medicine, mechanical engineering, material technologies, and of course gravity, the fatal journey is made pleasing, elegant, and meaningful. So he worked on the science of this, and it's completely possible to do this. And so the proposition for this doctor, and I'll skip through this video, was that she could begin to show these and have these conversations to get people to talk about this. And I think this is part of the future of this way. Again, moving beyond the status quo and then being able to bring it back into the to the everyday. So that's with the practical application. So we can see this put up in therapy, counseling, coaching, public policy, deliberative democracy, right? Basically helping to form a pre-vote, right? We have an object that begins to look at one outcome for a vote and another object if we vote another way, and it helps us to have that conversation and reflection about which kind of future we want right before we vote. So we can begin to see it work in those kinds of ways. So just as a recap, these four domains that were based after these within this area of discursive design, sort of looking in the expansion in these four fields. This is sort of just basically what I talked about today, and there's just so much more in this realm, and this is sort of what our book addresses a lot of the deeper issues with this. And also, there's a database that we have. This, if you have interest in this realm, we're putting a database together of all these different types of projects by theme, and then by designers as well, and then how they begin to relate to each other. And so we're hoping to have this completed in a few months. But with that, I would like to take some questions on this area. So. Oh, okay, thanks. Thoughts? Where it's relevant, not so relevant, like, oh, this is weird stuff, what an ugly toaster, that's stupid. Yeah, like, oh, completely open to the space. Because I like presenting because sometimes I present to talk to more artistic communities and ones that are more practical. And for me, what's interesting about what I found with my more practical communities is basically beginning to open up this space a little bit more for them. And so I'm intentionally trying to stretch things a little bit for you.
Yes, hi, thanks. I may have missed the point here, so maybe you can explain this again, or maybe you have some further insight, but I remember when that Gil Scott-Heron poem came out in 1970, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," and it occurred to me then that he was dead wrong. Not only was the revolution televised, television was the revolution. I mean, it might not have been the revolution he wanted, but it's the one we got.
Right. Well, I'm distilling that very well maybe true in a way. I think the point that he was making, and what I'm getting at, is that the idea that more so than the technology of television, that we're really looking at the fact that what happened, that the things that we see in the world, these revolutions, whether televised or not, right? We witness a revolution happening, which is what he was seeing, that actually was, before that happened, people's consciousness changed that allowed them to do that action in the world. So that's the idea that I was pulling on that, more so than the technology of TV itself. But the idea that actions in the world begin with these sort of changes in thought. And that's, I think, what he was getting at with his explanation of that.
Hi, I wanted to talk about the toaster.
Yeah.
Because I understand it was made from like very low budget, and I guess the experiment was to see if you could actually make a toaster on like $10. So did it work?
Right. Well, actually, it was a very expensive toaster. So he wasn't trying to make a toaster for $10. He knew he couldn't possibly do that, and that was part of the challenge. Like that's the impetus for this was how the heck can a toaster cost just $10 when we begin to think about everything that goes into that. And so it was really sort of unpacking actually how difficult and how these complex systems exist that allow us to do that in a very an efficient manner. The toaster worked for a second or two and then burned out. And there's kind of for me, there's like a kind of a poetry to that, right? He could have, like if he really wanted to make this thing work, he could go back and start again, but it really wasn't necessarily the point of it. It was really this process that he went through to try and get that. The fact that it even didn't work after a whole year of work, and in his book he outlines everything that he did to try and find a place that had the mica and these mines and to try and be able to create this. That's what the project was about, the difficulty of that, and the fact that all this work that he put in, and thousands of dollars, for this, and plus his time, and it's something that could be bought for $10. So that was part of the discourse that he was dealing with. Okay. So it did actually work for a brief moment, and then burned out. So you could actually say it didn't really work, right? Okay. So. But it's interesting. He was on the Colbert Report talking about this project, and that was sort of interesting to think about this dissemination for it. And so in a way, it was good because a broader community was kind of exposed to this, but it was sort of also bad in a way too, because it wasn't really necessarily the right format. We're dealing with Colbert that. It came off as more jokey than he wanted. So he has very serious discourse here, and it probably wasn't the right space to begin to talk about that in a serious way on a comedy news show. So. Yes.
So I'm a literary scholar, which means I'm neither practical nor artistic. So I'm stretching you just a little bit longer. But the toaster actually makes me think of my question, which was, it seems to me that part of the point of that project is trying to reconstruct the history of materials extraction and development and design as an individual, right? So there's actually a historical kind of component to it, which brings me to my question. Most of these projects seem to be really future-oriented. I was curious to what extent discursive design could be used to explore the past in new ways, if there are projects that come to mind that are sort of past focused.
I would say there's probably less, actually nothing's coming like a past focus, which is interesting. We see other ones that are sort of present focused as well. But this is one of the deals, I think, that this area of strategic foresight that already is known and accepted within industry is allowing this kind of design to sort of enter into that space. So we're kind of tagging along, and a lot of futurists are looking at discursive design right now as a way to help them do what they do better, to begin to visualize in that way. So that's why it tends to get connected. And also, I mean, these are a lot of the questions that we have. And that's critical design as a field tends to look at the present systems more. And this area of speculative design and design futures, which a lot of these projects were around because that's more the industry-backed stuff, is looking at sort of the future stuff. But it's interesting, the issue of the past, and there's no reason why it couldn't. There are some that deal with counterfactuals. Yeah. There are some projects that deal with, like, what happened. It's sort of a man in the high castle kind of thing. Like, what happened if Hitler, if Germany had won World War II, and then so there's a project, the MacGuffin Library. It's called. It's a project done by a designer in this space. So, and there's other sort of counterfactuals that kind of might look a little bit more at the past, but. I think the MacGuffin, it's the MacGuffin Library project that he has. It's sort of stretching where discursive design is, but he's done a lot of projects in this way. He works a lot with film, so for me it's a little bit of a stretch to be sort of like pure discursive design, but it's dealing with sort of past as a counterfactual. But that's an interesting area to begin to explore, because there's no reason why we can't, right? Look past, present, future with his work.
I have a question.
Sure.
So was the nature pod, was that purely speculative, or were they collecting data from those people that came and did that, and did they go forward with anything?
Right. So I put that in the category of social engagement because they weren't actively, it wasn't active research. So you might say it's like light research, and anecdotally they were getting feedback. They were absolutely getting feedback from people, but it wasn't sort of organized in that way. That wasn't their mandate. So the company didn't say, hey, I want to know what people are saying, and they weren't recording this. So it's all anecdotal, which is why I sort of put it in that social engagement category. And why I think the rationale was really branding. They become sort of associated with this project that is kind of provocative, and then people later on understand it was spoof. It gets in these there are lots of these sort of spoof type projects that get into some of the ethics of doing this kind of work. And there's sort of a challenge there. To what degree are you fooling people, and how long do you let them be fooled in this way? And that was one of the things they did, is they let people experience and think, and then at some later, I think maybe the second day with this project, they were sort of like letting people know a little bit about it. But it is a challenge, right? Because if you want people to engage, you want to get an authentic reaction, you want them to have authentic reflection. Once you know it's a spoof, you begin to engage in it differently. So there's a power to thinking that there's a reality to these projects. But when you do this sort of spoof thing, you kind of get into maybe you can get in some ethical, a gray area. So, yes.
So a lot of these projects a lot of them are commentaries on sort of like consumerism and like consumption and commercialization and branding. And as an industrial design student, how do you think that can be balanced, where we're well aware of like the problems with these, but also balancing it with the fact that very likely in our careers we will have to be tasked with doing similar functions for companies that we are employed at?
Right. I think that's a fundamental question that all, especially industrial design students, have to begin to reflect upon. Like, where is your role in this? And a lot of them do are getting at that. And this is a decision that you have to make, right? It's really easy, and it's, because we have a negativity bias, and a lot of these and that's sort of a criticism of the field, a lot of it tends to be a little bit more dystopic and critical than inspirational, for example. So that's one of the arguments we're making is like, why are we not working more in this, in sort of in the positive realm rather than more of a negative realm? But again, I think some of this has been a reaction to, that Corning day made of glass. A lot of it is sort of reaction to that, where corporations are putting out this utopic vision, and they're sort of taking maybe a little bit of a negative one as a bit of a counterbalance. But the question you ask is very real. And this is when we think about this kind of practice, right? When I talk to design students all the time, it's not necessarily all or nothing, right? And that's why this Kickstarter thing is really a pretty interesting arena where you can work in a way, right? The reality is you have school loans you have to pay off, and that there's a reality to that, and we all live with that. But it doesn't mean that you can't bring discursiveness, attempt to bring discursive into that realm, like working from within rather than being activist from without. And also doesn't mean that you can't have these other projects that sort of attend to this other issue, or these other agendas that you have. The idea that you're purely one, unidimensional, I'm not, I don't necessarily think that other people are. But it's a fundamental question that you need to ask as an industrial designer, is your relationship with this and to what degree you're comfortable with it. This is largely the growth of responsible design came out. I mean, when I was going to school, there weren't very many options, but there were students who were like, I don't want to work for industry, but it's really that only options there. But we're seeing sort of a growth in this, we've seen a growth in the responsible, like OpenIDEO, IDEO.org, Project H, there are these DCIS, like these, there are options for you to work in a more responsible, socially responsible way as a designer. They're not as lucrative, but they're out there as a possibility. And as I look at this area of responsive design and how it's developed, I see the same thing happening with this discursive realm, which is sort of why I was sort of looking at the future of basic research and practical application. We can begin to see how these might enter in the world the same way that we saw an evolution with responsible design. So I see there's a link there, but it's an issue that you gotta deal with. I think you should be addressing, and it's completely personal how you want to work through those potentially contradictory. But wow, you could completely claim that the world is a much better place because of. And then the arguments, especially the conservatives, like the capitalism, the greatest thing ever. Like the capitalism is the reason why we have, the wealth and comfort and convenience that we have today, right? So that's an argument. There's a discourse about that, and this is we're part of that system that's actually making people's lives better, right? Yeah. So, and so it's a complicated discourse that you can come at from a lot of different angles. And I'm just interested in having those conversations and have students reflect and have those conversations, rather than me having an opinion more so one way or the other. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, challenges? Architects, right? There's critical architecture, right? So are you familiar with critical architecture at all? Right? So, yeah? Oh, no? Nothing? No. Critical architecture is interesting because critical architecture sort of was on the scene maybe 15 years prior to critical design. But what's interesting about critical architecture, or the way that we see it, Stephanie and myself, is that it's largely a visual form of architectural criticism. It tends to focus on the field of architecture more directly. It has less to say about credit default swaps or teenage pregnancy or some of these larger social issues that discursive design can seemingly more easily deal with. So there is this realm of critical architecture that has been at this. In fact, there were elements of post-critical architecture before there was even notions of critical design. And this is one of the debates right now going on, is the critical versus the post-critical in this way. The critical meaning, or the post-critical argument is like, so in the Anthropocene, The world's falling apart. Do we have the luxury of all thought and no action, right? Should these be, is it good enough to just make a toaster, right? Or how should we actually be moving in the world and creating change with these projects? So that's a little bit of a critical, post-critical debate that discursive design is just starting to have, that critical architecture has had for 15 years maybe. Okay, are we good? Okay, thank you.